Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Sure. Hi. What I do at Insight-Driven Business is really, I come from a long history in Silicon Valley. So I've worked at Apple twice. I've had 2 tours of duty with Apple. The first was when we rolled out the Mac. So I was on the HyperCard 2 development team. And if you recall, if you ever seen some of the replays, when it said "Welcome to Mac" and it animated that was our team. We did that, and it didn't work until about an hour before Steve got on stage. So talk about a lot of hand wringing and well, that was going on. Then I went out and started several different businesses, and then finally did a couple of really good bingo bango deals where we merged into large companies. Ran a company out of Florida doing online gaming, which is really sportsbook. And at the time, we couldn't be on U.S. soil, and now you have companies like FanDuel and everybody else that are the official sportsbook of the NFL. So sometimes timing is everything, right? We were about 4 years too early. We actually sold our business to Ladbrokes for about $35 million, but you look at FanDuel and they're like $900 million minimum in terms of what their business is like today. Anyway, so that's kind of the history. Now, the reason why this is kind of important, it goes right into the talk, is this. What we're experiencing in AI is not dissimilar to some of the things that happened when the internet first started. Okay, now there's lots of people here who don't remember that. And that's okay. Understand this though, before there was the internet, there were probably 3 different, maybe 4 different proprietary networks. There was CompuServe. Does anybody remember this? Yeah. CompuServe, Prodigy, Genie. I think there was one more that they were all competing. And Apple had Apple Talk at the time. AOL. So everybody had their own, AOL, right? Which, by the way, little tiny story. AOL really was Apple Online. And so Steve Case was actually working with Apple with Steve Jobs, and they got pissed off at each other. And so the email system that we had at Apple, they decided to go in a different direction. So Steve actually went off and started AOL. So he got Guy Kawasaki to go out and help him do that. Anyway, fun fact. So at the time, there were these large companies who wanted to have proprietary systems, right? And we're experiencing a lot of that today. When we talk about some of the things that Justin was talking about, where you have Meta, who is the classic example of why they, on the one hand, they're saying everything is open, but oh, by the way, we're going to give you the developer tool and you're going to only be able to use it on our platform, right? The last thing you want to do, I think, this is just my opinion, is be reliant on one platform. So same thing happens kind of with ChatGPT. I use that platform as well. To design agents. However, there are certain things, certain LLMs, Kevin knows this, and I know Justin does too, that certain LLMs are designed for specific tasks much better than others. And I have a slide here, we'll kind of go through that in a second. Let's see. So we'll talk about 2 things. First is about guardrails. And the second part of it, we're going to talk about LLMs. And guardrails really come from a couple of experiences, one of which is what I said before, where it was about the internet, and we have to protect ourselves against these large companies who are going to come in and try and take over everything. So it's good that we get access to all these platforms. What we don't know is that we have been training these AIs for probably about 25 years, right? The very first tool that was created was by an MIT professor that you guys might have seen used, called CAPTCHA, right? CAPTCHA was designed intentionally, specifically to train an AI to pick up pictures, to understand how images worked. And we have been crowdsourcing all of this stuff for 25 years without us knowing it. So I'm all about trying to understand how you can control your information and keep it private, coming from Apple. So What you see here is kind of the representation of where we're at in AI. We're speeding along, and we're just kind of going on. We're going to use the next greatest, fastest, best thing that we can, but we're not thinking about some of the other things that you need to think about if you're developing applications. So there's a difference between a tool, right? The tool that we have with ChatGPT. There's a tool that we have with Anthropic. You can develop a bunch of different things that are really cool. Meta has a tool. Google has a tool. AWS now has a tool as well. They're all designed around being able to keep you on their platform. So what my big thing is, if I have a message to deliver tonight that I'm really passionate about, it's please take a look at what your use case is and define for yourself what the best LLM is going to be for your user, right? Because a workflow is different than a utility. I was on the phone today with a doctor who's developed several different utilities about how to diagnose and treat heart disease. Great, it's a wonderful tool, except that he's only focusing on 4.0. He's not using 4.0 mini, he's not using MedPalm 2, he's not using some of the proprietary LLMs. He's using RAG as a mechanism to focus down on getting proprietary information. Does everybody understand what RAG is?
No.
Okay. Retrieval Augmented Generation is what it stands for. And what it does is you theoretically upload your data, a PDF. Do you use GPT at all?
Yes.
And you create your own agents?
Upload what?
A PDF.
Yes, yeah.
You upload that, and that turns into your proprietary information in your agent. And so theoretically what happens is you run your agent and it's going to grab your information from that set of data first. A couple of things. You don't know if it's actually pulling from your data first, or is it going out to the LLM? And the second is, when they do that, there are certain numbers of what they call chunks. So if your PDF, even though the token, right, you may have a 2 million context message size, and your PDF is only 100 megs, or 100 pages, or whatever that ends up being. But when you use RAG, it doesn't pull all of the data and search it. It's not a database search. So you think that you're getting all the data. Kevin, you correct me if I'm wrong on this, right?
Well, it is a database search before it goes to the LLM to get the tokens of interest.
So
and it uses a math problem where
right.
instead of doing a keyword search where you're searching for words, before you actually create the database of this PDF, you have to convert everything in it to chunks of tokens.
Mm-hmm.
And those chunks of tokens are what you use the math to compare what your prompt, which they turn into a chunk of token, and they compare it, and they look for they call it the multi-dimensional array of relationships that are represented by each of these chunks. And if you can make a comparison to your prompt to whatever is in your database in this new converted format, they'll pull out those relevant features, and then that is what you would feed the LLM. So you shorten your context window from that 10 megabyte file to just a blurb of the most necessary.
Right. And depending upon what tool you're using, the chunk is defined by the vendor, right? So there are some, like I happen to use an application program called Mind Studio, which enables me to use any number, and you'll see the list of LLMs that I use in my workflows. There's 12 of them, no, there's 22 of them in all my workflows. So the chunks are small. You may get 4,000 chunks, a chunk of 4,000 units. You may get one for 8,000, but your document may be 16,000. It's making a choice. And what you don't know is what that choice is. It's doing as best as it can. It's going to set the numbers up. It'll create its own vector, and using however it was trained, right? You're going to have the numbers that sit out there that it's going to infer what the right answer is. But we don't know. That's the key. That's the issue. And we were talking earlier about how can you validate the responses. That's one of the challenges, is that you don't really know because that's not published. I run a prompt every month, and I've run the prompt for about 2 years. This is before ChatGPT 3 came out, and it was, can you tell me how you're trained on your data? When I first ran that prompt about 2 years ago, it would actually tell you all the data, everything that was there. And then over time, that information stopped being available. The companies, again, the large companies, don't want you to know what they're training things on. That's their intellectual property. That's their, kind of going back to what happened on the internet side. Now, I have this big thing about that because I understand how technology can be utilized incorrectly. In addition to that, many years ago, my colleagues and I, we started a distance training company in the country of Sri Lanka, in a little town outside of Colombo. And this was a distance training company, and it was designed specifically to teach entrepreneurship to the underserved in Southeast Asia. Well, we had to build a water supply and sewer and all that kind of stuff. More importantly, we had to build a satellite network, because at the time, 1996, the only way that you could get the internet was through a big, satellite dish, and you were pulling down big T1 speeds, which is like 1.3 megabits per second. We're not at gigabits, right? We're at megabits. But you could get kind of grainy, full screen video on distance training. And so we thought we were doing this wonderful service to everybody that was there. Unfortunately, there are people who would like to use that technology for themselves. And we didn't know at the time that there was going to be a civil war, and there was. So they fought over this 58 acres of land that we reclaimed, and they stole and took the satellite dishes and everything else that came with it. So as we, as founders and CEOs of our technology businesses, there are unintended consequences of everything that we do. So I'm always trying to think about, and raise that issue as we start building AIs. So that's what we're talking about here, building these guardrails. So why do we need guardrails? Well, besides the fact that I'm passionate about, making sure that we do have them, these are all the reasons why people don't trust AI right now. We have to, people have a perception that it's going to harm people. There's a perception that it's not being used ethically. There's a perception that it can be used illegally. And all of these things are true, but they're fears. And we as developers and founders and CEOs must look at this and address the issue. Otherwise, they won't be adopted generally by the public. A study came out about a month ago that said 56% of the population of the United States does not have anything to do with AI. In fact, they don't even know what it is. 56% of the population. So when we talk about it, we talk about it. It's like important, right? It's one of the biggest things that we can do is have these conversations about what AI is. But if we want this to be generally available and used by the public, then we have to address these fears. How do we ensure ethical behavior? How do we build trust, right? These are the reasons why we want to have guardrails that's set up. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. So now let's kind of go to this one. What kind of guardrails are needed? Well, we need to have ethical guidelines. That's one of the things that Anthropic is really good at. They have an institute, the Hume AI. Has anybody heard of Hume? Hume AI is a really interesting organization, and what they can do in their AI is, as you're talking to it, it actually understands and empathizes with who you are, such that it understands how you're feeling, what your emotional state is at that moment in time. It's like, wait a minute. Now you're saying that AI can understand how I feel? Yes, it can. But Hume AI is looking at it from an ethical perspective. How will we use that? So it's not just releasing it out into the public. You have to, apply to use it and give them a use case. And I think that's a good first step in applying AI to all of these applications in the future. We have to start setting up these technical safeguards, right? When we're developing an AI app on top of ChatGPT-4, we're not thinking about this at all. We're just thinking about, I've got this use case in my head, I want to get from here to there. And that's okay, that's a utility, but when we start developing applications that we want to deploy and start thinking about how we're going to grow and scale it, if it's going to be a business, then these are the kinds of things that we need to put in place. Human oversight is really critical. There's Hume AI is a really good company that's actually focused on ensuring that we use things sustainably. There's the Ethical AI Institute. There are 5 different organizations that are focused specifically on being able to set up human oversight and accountability and governance. Governance is really important for us. I won't go that. Does everybody understand what's going on in the European Union with regulatory compliance? Okay, so I'll give you a real brief thing on this, right? So the European Union is taking a stab at trying to regulate how to use AI. And the people here in the US, if you listen to Mark Andreessen, does anybody know who Mark Andreessen is? Mm-hmm. Mark Andreessen is, one of the principals at Andreessen Horowitz, who is that's a venture capital firm. And he was also the founder of Netscape. So he understands browsers from back in the day, and he's doing all kinds of wonderful things. Anyway, he believes that we should have just a free market and let everybody have access to it, and we'll figure it out along the way. That's what we did before with the internet, and we have what we have today. Not saying it's bad, it's a really good thing, changed a lot of different things. But we also have Dark GPT. Has anybody heard about that? Fraud GPT. So, how we set up these regulatory rules, I think is going to be important. In the European Union, they've said, if you're at the base level, where Kevin is now learning how to do LLMs and private LLMs, and those LLMs are functionally could change or harm life, then you're personally going to be responsible if somebody uses your LLM. Now here in the United States, we go, no, we don't want that because that stifles innovation. So they have 4 groups of AIs. There's a level on top of that, which is, do you know what it is, Kevin, off the top of your head? The EU?
Groups
of the EU.
No, I'm not really aware what's going on
Okay,
in the EU.
so you have the basic AI, which is the LLM. Then you have an application layer that sits on top of that people rely on for banking and that kind of thing. There's a regulation that applies to applications that use that level of AI. Then you have AIs that we would probably design ourselves and for our own businesses that we work in to help us become more efficient and more get things done faster. And then you have a very high level, which is like a GPT where you could just do queries and stuff. So as you go up the levels, there's less and less restrictions and less responsibility that the author of those AI tools have. Here, we don't do that at all. So if you are designing and developing an application, and it is going to be an international application, then you must pay attention to the laws, right? You'll have to build in that into what your business plan is going to look like. Okay, and then finally, when you design and develop an AI, yeah, go for it.
It'd be good to pause on that because it's really interesting to me of how, where things can go wrong on those levels. If you're saying that the higher you get on there, like at the application layer, you're not as prone to be regulated against because it should be handled at lower levels. Mm-hmm. But then you have what we're talking about is jailbreaking,
right?
The lower levels, and so does that then fall? I think that would probably be more of the fault on the application side if you're purposely trying to, jailbreak the lower level to tell you how to create a bomb or do something really bad, right?
Right.
So even though that data is all in that lower level, they try to put the right guardrails so that it's safe, but you can always unlock that with just a little bit of clever prompt engineering, or you can unlock it with just a little bit of fine tuning on the, changing the weights just a little bit to take away those guardrails. So to sort of regulate heavier or lower based on what level you're at doesn't seem to fit in my my thought.
You know, I agree. And I have no idea why I understand why they chose to do what they chose to do because I've been following it. But that said, it's extremely difficult to try and figure out how do you weight it, right?
Yeah.
Because you're absolutely right. It's easier, I think, if you're smart enough to understand how to fine tune an LLM. It's one thing to get something different as opposed to doing really clever prompt engineering and having it hit and do like a mini denial of service attack on the AI, the LLM itself, to get you something that you want. Mm-hmm. Those types of things, they can set up guardrails for that prevent that from happening. So it's going to be really interesting to see how, if the large language model companies decide that they want to prevent that from happening. I think they do, but all the people at OpenAI that are part of the red team, most of them have gone. Are you familiar with the red team? Okay, so there's a blue team and there's a red team, right? The red team is designed specifically to evaluate LLMs to make sure that they're behaving ethically. And it's a program that the companies have put together so that it would prevent the government from coming in and putting requirements on the companies themselves. So you'll see red teams for OpenAI. Anthropic has one. I'm not sure. Meta does too, I think.
Yeah, basically it's an opposition force.
Yeah.
They do it in the military too.
Yeah, so think about it as kind of like the black hat guys that are really white hats. Their job is to come in and let's see if we can screw it up, right?
I had a question.
Yeah.
Maybe this has already been answered, but I've noticed that that a lot of the big companies and those in power, they are for all of these things, the guidelines, safeguards, controls, compliance, and governance, as long as it serves their interest. And if it doesn't quite serve their interest or serve the narrative that they're pushing, they will try to alter it so that it does. So how do you ensure that these things are implemented where we have those safeguards and compliance, but it's done in a manner that's fair, unbiased, and balanced?
Yeah.
That is the $100 gazillion question. Absolutely. So everybody we talk about all these different things. It's like law and order, right? Talk about politics. Everybody wants law and order as long as I'm making the law and the order is on the way I want it, right? The big companies, that's what they want. They're designed and intended, large companies are, to protect their business, right? They're in the business to make money, and they want to make sure their share price is going to stay up where it is. They'll do whatever they can to prevent you, startup companies, from taking their market share. They'll buy you out, because you've had that happen. I've been bought out twice to be put out of business. They bought my company specifically because we were eating their lunch. This is Nielsen. And we did in 6 months with 20 people, what they'd been doing with 95 people for 5 years. We did it in 6 months with a small group of people. They bought us so that we couldn't put our product in the marketplace. That's kind of the nature of what the beast is. Now, I got a nice check out of that, but I was sitting in the corner office in Santa Clara, right across from Great America Parkway, for 3 years and did absolutely nothing.
Oh.
So I know exactly what you're talking about. Couldn't do anything because we had a non-compete. So I have strong feelings about these things. So for us as developers, we can take some of the responsibility for this. So when we go out and talk with prospects and clients and everything, we can actually say, you know why we're different? We're different because we're implementing these. And we're going to walk you through the process of having your own ethical guidelines and putting up your own governance group. That's simple. It's really simple and easy. And if they choose not to do that, then they choose not to do that. Now you as a developer have the opportunity to say, do I want to work with these people, yes or no? Ooh, that's always a tough one, right? Especially when money's tight and I'm not sure where we're going, and but we have to think through some of these things because there are unintended consequences for the actions that we have. Great question,
I want
Michael.
to say one more thing on it.
Sure.
I kind of line up with Elon Musk on his feeling that the models and the types of systems we should be building are the ones that are the most truthful, and that should be our optimization. And everything outside of that, if we're governing and we're trying to install our morals and ethical guidelines onto we're going to fail every time. There's just not going to be, we're either going to cause the harm we're trying to prevent, or we're going to create more of the harm because it's, you know, creating more attention on a problem that you need an equal access by both the good and the bad to ultimately fight it out on individual cases. As long as you're on a platform that is trained for optimizing truth, then that's putting us in the safest trajectory forward, I think. Bad people are going to use it for bad things. They're going to be able to hack it to do their bad things. But as long as you have good people that are hacking it to prevent those good things in an open market, that's not going to be like, they don't feel at risk for even trying to jailbreak these things out of curiosity or out of natural like tendencies to just tinker with things. Then you're going to prevent any fight against the bad guys. So there needs to be an open playing field here, I think, and it needs to be centered on truth. Otherwise, we're lost from the very get-go. Because if you have a system that's corrupt from the truth, from its internal mechanisms, like let's say China builds a model that's like hate the enemy, America, you know, like that's all embedded into it, then that's not going to be something that is it's very problematic, right?
Sure. So, but let's talk about truth for just for 1 second, because I think that's a great point. Have you ever heard of anybody on television or anyplace else saying, Kevin, tell me your truth? Is there truth, or is there your truth? And is your truth different than your truth? Because if it is, guess what? We have anarchy. And the same thing happens with harm, right? Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. Do no harm. Well, how do you define harm? There's different dimensions. There's physical harm, there's financial harm, there's emotional harm, there's intellectual harm. And how do we, that's one of the challenges that we have with AI development, is that we don't even have these defined for ourselves. And so we're expecting an AI to be ethical, or to be able to do things in a non-harmful way when we don't even do it ourselves. I find that really intriguing. But I think that there's ways that we as developers can implement some of these guidelines, these guardrails, that will minimize the risk. And there will be other people who come along who, fortunately, will be fighting the good fight with the white hats. They have to be, right? We do it, dude.
Yeah, I suppose the truth comes from the quality of the sensor data. Like I'm thinking of more of like physical truth in a lot of ways, and like how we can push more of that like historical documentation and stuff, and how to take out all human bias out of that before putting it into these models, and having analysts from both sides, historians that know the best form of truth that we can come up with, and saying that's the data that's going into these models, not a bunch of opinions and political, sways of like modern eras stuff.
So we were talking a little bit, Sheila and I were talking before we started today about bias, right? Data is data.
Yeah.
So, and I'm working in the medical field, doing patient intake for a variety of locations around the United States. And there are underserved populations whose data about their medical history is not part of the data set that's being used for the standard of care. It's missing. So is the data biased, or is it just incomplete? And if it is incomplete, how do we complete it? These are questions I think we could probably ask as we're designing and developing our AIs.
I'm sorry, it just occurred to me that the data is not even relevant when you get an AI that can actually reason. So once you have an AI that can reason, it's going to find its own data wherever it finds it. So how do you point the AI, which is much smarter than us, to go find the right data? Like, you're not going to have any control over that. It's just going to find whatever data it finds, right? That's kind of
So the question ends up being the massive conundrum, right, about AGI, is what you're talking about, right? It's going to be so smart and so capable that it goes beyond what we can think of and what we can do. And I think there's probably some use for that in the future. But I also think that we're going to have to ask it questions and use our critical thinking to help it be more critically thinking as well, right? And there are ways that you can do prompt injections in a way that make it think better, right? You can do chain of thought prompts. You can chain of density prompts that enable you to get to the actual information that you're trying to get to. And it improves itself right in front of you. But you have to have, you know, what's that? The humans have to be involved here, right?
Isn't that going to fundamentally bias it?
Yeah. So, you know, that goes to this one. Design for human in the loop. There is no easy button. Everybody wants the easy button. Oh, you know, we'll let somebody else take care of the problem for us. No, we have to be responsible and participate in the whole thing. So even if you're, I mean, I do this with my clients right now. They ask, can you just have it do it for me? And my response is, I could, but I'm not going to. Because guess what? If you allow it to do its work for you, then you're devaluing what you bring to the table. That's not critically thinking. That's not preparing yourself to participate in this new world that we have with AI. In fact, what we're trying to do is give you the skill set to upskill what you're doing. But you have to do both. You have to be able to utilize it and stay in the loop, stay participating with it, and then design for explainability. That's our job, right? Because if we're explaining it, then we can actually do the next part, which is scheduling the audits. That's the roadmap. This is the roadmap that we need to be able to follow, I think, to develop responsible AI applications. Now, will we solve all of the problems? No, we're not going to. But that's not what we can do, right? We couldn't do that anyway, even if there was an AI. But at least putting the roadmap together and we get a bunch of developers and founders and CEOs thinking in this direction, then we can have a positive impact on how AI can benefit people instead of taking jobs away. That make sense?
I think this is like very realistic approach. Like, and then also the some kind of like moral consideration. Like this kind of reminds me one of the deep learning class like that I watched a while ago, which called supervised learning. But it's like always human check, and if it's better than or some average with human performance, then you know give it okay. But I'm just like wondering, even if AI really super developed, in some of value will be developed, and if that has better judgment than human, then can we tell is it has better judgment? Like, can you actually judge that?
Yeah, that's the Turing test, right? The Turing test is all about that. Can it do it better than a human can? And that's really an interesting ethical question. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is. But what I do know is if we're thinking that we're doing this hell-bent on making that happen, let's just make the artificial general intelligence and we'll figure it out. Man, I'll tell you, I've started 7 different companies, and any company that starts off and says, I'm gonna build it, you know, while I'm flying the plane, and with AI, so it's different when you have it on your own computer, right? If you control the environment, then the consequence of you screwing up and getting things could be your computer blows up or you lose your data, but that doesn't affect everybody. But we mess up on this thing, everybody's connected now. The consequences are really big. So I think there's a bigger responsibility for us on the development side. Anyway, thank you for letting me rant. I appreciate it. Now, let's go to part 2, right? The LLMs. We've been talking a little bit about this the whole time. And I told Sheila that we were going to talk about this. So this is the cost for some of the top LLMs that are out there. We'll go back to this. This is Anthropic. And what they're good for and what they're not good for. So how do I pull this together, right? I have a whole series of prompts that I run on a monthly basis, and I run them against every one of them. It's a pain. Except I decided, let me create an AI to do that for me. So now guess what? That's what I do. I have it and I go, okay, this is what it does. It's really good for this. It's not really good for this. We got to watch out for the price range. And oh, by the way, if you're designing and developing applications for, you know, scaling, and deploying and scaling, then guess what? You need to absolutely have an understanding of what this is. Because your business model is going to be affected if you decide that you wanted to use Sonnet 3.5. Not inexpensive, not expensive for the prompt cost, but look at what it comes back. So if you have a really, really large prompt and so a large number of tokens, that's going to use up a lot of your money relatively quickly. For you as an individual, not so much. But if you have 10,000 people that are hitting your AI, and each of them are using all of that, who's going to be paying for that? You better make sure that you have that as part of your financial plan. Yeah.
What is a large prompt? Like, how many characters are you talking? Just curious.
So 200,000 tokens is,
Okay.
yeah, it's probably a book,
Oh.
right?
Okay.
Now, here's the problem.
Uh-huh.
Whenever you send out a prompt, right, it's going to return something to you. Remember, it's a conversation now. So next time you send a prompt, it's going to send that, plus it's going to send the response that you had before. So now you're going to come back and you're going to do it again, and all of a sudden, all of your tokens could potentially be used up. That's one of the reasons why when you have some of these really smaller LLMs, it runs out. You can figure out why did it stop? Why is my answer not right? It's not that your answer wasn't right, it just didn't have, you ran past their limit.
Oh, I see.
Think of it kind of like a computer. It's got so much RAM, and once it stops, well, on a computer you have swapping, right? So it takes it out of RAM and it swaps it to your hard drive, and then it comes back. Not all the LLMs have that functionality yet. They might, but that's the reason why they need large GPUs. And now there's new, what do they call them? LPUs?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the new one, right?
Yeah.
So now there's going to be this another whole set of battles that go along. But anyway, so this is really, I mean, I use every one of these. So I'll have a workflow that may have 20, 25 different steps in the workflow. And I'll look at it from the perspective of where can I get the highest use at the lowest cost? Because at scale, if I'm going to have 5,000, 10,000 people, I need to make sure that I'm going to have a financial model that works. So that's up through Meta. And this is Mistral, obviously OpenAI, Perplexity, and Rika. It's really interesting when you start using these. And I know I'm taking up too much of your time, so I don't really want to go into some of the stuff, but fundamentally, when you run a prompt, you can actually see the difference. In the application I use, MindStudio, they have a function called Profiler. And so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, this is what I want my output to be, right? So I'll prompt and run it against 3 different AIs concurrently to determine what the response is going to look like. And I think that's what responsible AI development is going to look like in the future, is to have a tool where you can run your prompts to determine if the outcome is closest to what your use case requires. That make sense? That's it. That's all I got.
Thanks for that. It's a good resource. You know what I'll do is I'll ask GPT to tabulate all of that data and give me the best solution for whatever I need.
So, okay, let's talk about that for a second. I spend a lot of time marketing, right? Are you familiar with the term brand voice? Okay, so I have a specific way that I think, act, speak, and feel. A brand, a company, a product has a brand voice. I don't care how smart an AGI gets. It cannot speak those 4 things unless it learns me over time. Now, I have trained my buddy Higgins to speak like me. So when I go out and I start talking to people, you could do a table and it says, yeah, that's sure, it's good for this, good for that, good for this. But if I wanted to speak in an empathetic way that focuses on one of my clients, her biggest core value is joy and happiness, right? So everything that goes in has to have joy and happiness. Everything that comes out must have some form of reference to joy and happiness. That's not something an AGI is going to have, unless it knows who she is. That's what we do. So I speak to lots of different companies when, in fact, I have an AI that's called write an article from an article, right? So like I follow McKinsey and what they're doing at that level, and I have conversations with them every once in a while, and they'll write something about AI, and I'll go, hey, that's cool. I'd like to use that as part of what I want to talk about. So I pull that out, I have it summarized, and then once I summarize it, then I say, what's the real challenge for the market that I want to address? I want to address small to medium-sized businesses. McKinsey doesn't deal with small to medium-sized businesses for the most part. They're enterprise. So now what I'm doing is I'm saying, I've got this information out here, I'm going to refine it for my market, and now I want you to speak in my voice, pull out the things that we do as a company, put it into this, and now create an article. That's not something an AGI can do. That's not something a ChatGPT does. That's combining human brilliance and augmenting it with AI. That's what we stand for. Yeah.
So JD, can you talk about what you're doing right now? What is your business model? Are you like a consultant?
I do both. So I do consulting for small businesses, for medical doctors right now, and software companies, ironically enough, who don't know how to implement AI as part of their core technology platform. So I'm an outsourced AI CIO kind of thing, advising them on some of the stuff that we're talking about here. I also have a product, which is a platform for AI co-pilots. It's a platform where you can become your own expert. If you have subject matter expertise in any particular vertical market, I can train it, or actually you could train it, by uploading the same kind of stuff that we do in ChatGPT. And I can create the prompt appropriately such that it speaks in your voice. So you have an agent now that sits on your website that can talk to your prospects or your clients the way you would talk to them. But on top of that, I've also embedded feedback forms, rating systems, products. So if you're having a conversation about a product like my Copilot actually helps me sell Copilots, right? So this explains everything that you want to do with a Copilot. Here's what you might want to be able to consider. By the way, would you like me to send you our free 60-page guide on how to use AI responsibly? If you answer yes, then you go ahead and type your information in, lead generation, right? And we download that stuff. Now we're on our mailing list. Then the next thing is, oh, sounds like you're interested in what we're doing. Would you like to schedule a phone call? So call this thing there. And then finally, we have upsells and side sells that are part of the AI Copilot as well. So I have that as a platform. If anybody would like to have their own expert that speaks on their behalf, happy to do that. It's really inexpensive too. The biggest challenge is the training of the AI at inception. And then after that, it's like $49 a month, $75 a month, and $125 a month, because I'm going to be reviewing the AI response. Did I talk about drift?
Yeah.
At all?
No.
We talked it separately. So there's a concept in AI called drift, and drift is what happens when Kevin talks about. You can talk about drift, right? He's my man. He's keeping me honest on everything. But I work with IBM for startups, and they talk about this a lot, where if you continue to use an LLM for a longer period of time, and you use the prompt the way you started originally, and originally came up with the right answer that you were really happy with, over time the responses are going to degrade. You go, why is that happening? Because they're refining the AI, right? They're fine-tuning it. We don't know what they're doing, but they're fine-tuning it. And all it takes is a little tweak, and all of a sudden the response that you have is not working right. Not the way you expect it, let me put it that way, right? Because when you first go through it, you have an expectation and we can design for it. So what I do when I work with clients is I actually work with you over time to make sure your AI is working properly. So that's my AI for coaches. And then I have a product called AI Assistance, which is role-based at a company that crosses multiple departments. So workflows that can be automated through the use of AI. The one that I was talking about, Brand Voice, where I can create articles. I can also say, oh, this is for this particular client. We'll do research on that client live for a salesperson now. This is the marketing guy that wants the brand voice document in the article. But the same AI can now connect with the salesperson, train the salesperson on how to speak to that particular prospect, develop collateral materials, and if they want to, the AI will actually go through a training session where they have a simulated call with the prospect.
Oh,
That's cool, right?
that's actually interesting.
Now you're talking about an assistant that works across multiple departments for that particular role.
That's interesting.
And then the last part of it for us is AI robotics process automation. And that is where you can actually create an AI robot that understands how to log in. It reads your screen. It says, oh, I've got information that is an invoice with a PDF. It reads the PDF. It understands this is the customer. It goes into your finance application, QuickBooks or Great Plains or whatever. It opens up Great Plains and it says, I've got a purchase order from this particular company. I'm going to put it into the sales order system. And the person doesn't have to do anything. It's like, wait, what? So robotic process automation has been around for about 35 years, actually longer than that when you think about an arm that does this, right? And it puts cars together. All it knows to do is this. Well, if you think about it, when you're doing a process in a computer system, it's the same kind of thing. You're not doing this, you're going, click that button, open this screen, put this information in, click yes, go back to the first screen, do the same thing over and over and over again. We can have an AI robot do that through AI. You weren't able to do this before because one change in the color or the screen or the location of the buttons and everything would fall apart. But AI now prevents that from happening. So all of a sudden you can have humans involved in doing this data entry activity, but you can upskill them so that that data entry person is no longer entry, they're supervising the information. Ooh. So that's the other part that I think from at least from my perspective, it's we get the opportunity to have people participate in this new world that we're in, but we need to upskill the people that we can, who want to upskill themselves. But we need to give them the opportunity to do that. So when I build a workflow process through an AI assistant, and somebody could potentially feel like they're being displaced, then I actually go in and give them some upskill training on how they might want to take advantage of the next part of how AI can help them in their business instead of replacing themselves. Make sense?
Any
Are you
questions?
doing the UI automation in-house? Is it like some kind of open source or?
Yeah, no. Oh, well, that's the other part, open source. Talk about that for a second. One thing that, again, if you're developing AI applications, and we learned this, I think it was 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, we had IBM here, right? If you're using open source, please read the open source license, because if you use the wrong open source, you're guaranteeing sometimes in that license that your project is going to become open source.
That's true.
What? Yeah, you've now used this library to do your own thing, and you're thinking, yeah, this is totally cool. Except guess what? They could come back at you and say your whole application is open source. Anyway.
Here's, what do you think about like Suno is probably my best example of this, but like there's a lot of lawsuits from like authors, movie stars, music industry is going after Suno for scraping all the copyrighted music. What do you think the impact of that is on the future of AI? And like, imagine Suno's been going. There's millions of songs all over the place. People are streaming these songs, getting fees from their streams. Like, what is the implication of like, I don't know, court rules? Like, sorry, you guys have to go back and repay.
Do you remember Napster?
Yeah.
Okay, this is just Napster all over again. Same thing. Napster didn't survive, but it created a brand new industry. Suno may not survive this whole thing because, I think the argument that it's free and it's on the internet is bogus. I do. I mean, copyright law is all about, being able to take your stuff and copyright it so that it's yours, and you have to ask permission to use it. Now, what I will say, because again, I was a lawyer, is that most people never use the little C. They never use the C on their website. And by default, it's open, right? So even your blog posts, put copyright in there on that. That helps.
We did have a lawyer come in several months ago, and I'm actually thinking maybe at the year mark we'll actually invite him back and see if there's any updates.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions?